The order that changed everything. 31st January 1943 morning. We had been counting ammunition for 3 hours when Brandt came down the stairs. The bunker under the Univermag department store smelled worse than any place I had been in 4 months of Stalingrad. Hundreds of us packed into concrete corridors meant for storage, not soldiers. The air hung thick with unwashed bodies, frozen breath, and the sweet, sick smell of wounds going bad. I sat on a wooden crate with Erich and Ludwig, sorting through boxes of Mauser rounds. 5 bullets per rifle now, maybe 6 if we were lucky. The count never changed much. We had stopped receiving supply drops 3 weeks ago. Erich kept making small piles of cartridges on the floor, moving them from one side to the other. The boy had developed a nervous habit of reorganizing things. 19 years old, still believed in something, though I could not say what anymore. Ludwig helped him without speaking. The youngest of us rarely spoke these days. Brandt was different when he came down. His face had the grey color that meant bad news, and he had that look, the one that said he had just come from the command post upstairs. Unteroffizier Helmut Brandt, 32 years old, once a schoolteacher in Hamburg. Had a wife and 2 children he talked about in the early days, stopped talking about them around Christmas. He gathered us together near the corner where our squad had claimed 2 meters of wall space, told us there would be a briefing in 10 minutes. Something about the Feldmarschall. His voice was flat when he said it. The way voices got when men were trying not to show anything. The others started arriving. Gerhard appeared from somewhere deeper in the bunker, probably one of the makeshift hospital rooms where he had been helping with the wounded. At 35, he was the oldest among us, had been through the First War as a boy, carried that particular kind of fatigue that came from seeing it all before. Otto limped over on his bad leg, the one that should have been operated on 2 weeks ago, but there were no more surgeons, and the morphine had run out. Karl came last, still had that strange optimism about him. 20 years old, and somehow not completely broken yet. Ernst was praying in the corner. Had been praying more and more. Sometimes he whispered the words, sometimes just moved his lips in silence. I left him to it. The briefing came through Feldwebel Weiss, who had received it from someone higher up, who had received it from someone higher still. Information traveled down through the chain that way, getting vaguer at each level, like water filtering through sand. Weiss stood in the dim light of a carbide lamp and told us the Führer had promoted Paulus to General Feldmarschall. Yesterday, the 10th anniversary of the party coming to power. The men around me said nothing at first, then someone in the back muttered something about honor. Weiss continued. Said it was a recognition of our sacrifice, our struggle, our resistance against the Bolshevik hordes. The words sounded like they had been written in Berlin and transmitted exactly as ordered. Weiss did not believe them any more than we did. What he did not say, what everyone understood, was what the promotion meant. No German field marshal had ever surrendered, not in the last war, not ever. It was an invitation, phrased as an honor. The Führer expected Paulus to shoot himself, to spare the Reich the shame of a captured field marshal. Gerhard leaned close to me after Weiss dismissed us, said something about Prussian tradition and Baroque theater. His voice carried that bitter tone he used when talking about officers and their codes. I told him Paulus might do it. Men had done stranger things these past weeks. Gerhard shook his head slowly, said a man did not wait this long just to put a bullet in his own head. Said if Paulus had wanted to die gloriously, he would have done it in November. The day crawled forward the way days did in the bunker. No real sense of time passing, except for the count of rations and the schedule of guard shifts. Someone said it was morning, but morning looked the same as afternoon down there. Grey, half-light from a few lamps, shadows everywhere, cold that never stopped. Around midday, or what we thought was midday, word started spreading through the bunker like smoke through a house. The command post had received a Russian ultimatum. Representatives coming to negotiate. Brandt told us this, while we sat near our corner, and his voice had something in it I had not heard before. Not quite hope, but something close to it. The absence of absolute despair. Eric wanted to know if it meant surrender. Brandt said he did not know, said the Feldmarschall would decide. But we all knew the Feldmarschall had been promoted specifically to prevent such a decision. Otto asked what would happen to us if we surrendered. Nobody answered him. We had all heard the stories: Siberia, labor camps, mass executions. Some of it propaganda, some of it probably true, no way to know which was which. The propaganda had been very specific about Soviet treatment of prisoners, extremely specific, designed to make sure we understood surrender was not an option. But we were out of ammunition, out of food, out of hope. 18,000 wounded men in the bunker and the buildings around it. No medical supplies, no morphine, no bandages except what we tore from the dead. Men screaming in the hospital rooms, begging for someone to end it. The smell of gangrene everywhere. Sometime in the early afternoon, though again, time was meaningless down there, a strange sound moved through the bunker. Started in the upper levels where the command post was, rippled downward through the corridors, not quite talking, not quite shouting, a wave of sound that meant something had changed. Brandt went to find out what it was, came back 15 minutes later. His face had that grey color again, but his eyes were different, sharper, more focused. He gathered us close, spoke quietly so only our group could hear. Said Paulus had refused to kill himself. Said the Feldmarschall had specifically stated he would not do the Bohemian corporal that favor. That was the phrase, apparently. The exact words someone had overheard in the command post. Said Russian negotiators were coming. Said surrender was happening whether Hitler wanted it or not. The bunker began to change. Men who had been lying against walls for days stood up. Conversations started, not loud, not celebratory, but something stirred in the air that had been dead for weeks. The possibility of not dying in this hole. The possibility of seeing spring, of surviving, of something other than freezing or starving or bleeding out in the dark. But there were other reactions too. In the hospital rooms, some of the officers were refusing the news, said it was a lie. Said the Feldmarschall would never surrender, said they would continue fighting even if Paulus did not. Their voices carried through the concrete corridors, high-pitched, desperate, clinging to something that was already gone. And then the shots started. Not Russian fire, not artillery or mortars or the familiar sounds of combat we had lived with for months. Single rifle shots, muffled by concrete and distance, coming from the upper levels, from the officer quarters. 4 shots in the space of 10 minutes. Then silence. Gerhard said they were doing the honorable thing. Said Prussian officers understood duty even when their commanders did not. His voice had no emotion in it when he said this. I could not tell if he agreed with them or thought they were idiots. We sat in our corner and tried to understand what came next. Surrender meant the Russians would come down into the bunker, would march us out at gunpoint. Would take us somewhere, north probably, Siberia certainly, the camps we had heard about but never seen. Would take us to places where we might live or might die, but either way would not see Germany again for years, if ever. Erich was crying, not making noise, just tears running down his face, leaving clean tracks through the grime. Ludwig sat next to him with his hand on the younger man's shoulder, saying nothing because there was nothing to say. Otto started laughing. A strange sound, high and cracked, said he could not walk on his leg, so what were the Russians going to do with him? Shoot him here or shoot him later? What did it matter? Karl told him to shut up. Otto kept laughing until he started coughing, and the coughing turned wet, and he spat blood onto the concrete floor. Brandt sat with his back against the wall, staring at nothing. I asked him what he was thinking about. He took a long time to answer. Finally said he was thinking about his children. About whether they would remember him. About whether his wife would tell them he died here, or tell them he surrendered and was sent east and never came back. about which version would be easier for them to live with. Around 4 in the afternoon, or what might have been 4, the lamps made it impossible to know. Russian voices echoed through the upper corridors. Commands in that harsh language we had learned to recognize even if we could not understand it. Boots on stairs. The sound of surrender happening above us. Some men started moving toward the exits, ready to give themselves up. Others stayed where they were, waiting to be found. A few gathered their weapons, the rifles we had been carefully counting bullets for, and checked their ammunition, not to fight, just to hold, some last gesture of defiance or dignity or habit. And some men did something else entirely. It was Gerhard who first said it out loud. Said the Russians would sweep the bunker, but the bunker was enormous, hundreds of rooms and corridors and storage areas. Said they would take the ones who surrendered and probably assume they had everyone. Said the ruins above us were even bigger than the bunker, thousands of cellars and basements and tunnels in the factory district. Said a man could hide in there for days, maybe weeks, maybe long enough for the situation to change. I looked at him, asked him if he really believed the situation would change. He shrugged, said it did not matter what he believed, said the alternative was Siberia or a bullet, said he had been in Russian captivity before, briefly in the First War, said he would rather take his chances in the ruins. Erich stopped crying, looked up at Gerhard with something like hope in his eyes, asked if he was serious, if we could really hide, if we could really survive up there in the frozen wreckage of the city. Gerhard said he was not sure about surviving, but he was very sure about not surrendering. Brandt was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke quietly, carefully, said the Feldmarschall had surrendered and we were under orders to lay down weapons, said that was military law, said that was what soldiers did, but his voice had no conviction in it. And when Gerhard asked him if he was planning to follow those orders, Brandt looked away and did not answer. Otto said his leg was too bad. Said he could not walk more than 50 meters without collapsing. Said he would stay and take his chances with the Russians. Maybe they would shoot him, maybe they would leave him, maybe they would drag him to a camp. Did not matter much either way. Karl was torn, could see it in his face, the pull between surrender and escape, between following orders and staying alive, between the honorable thing and the practical thing. He kept looking at the stairs where the Russian voices were getting louder, kept looking at Gerhard, who was already checking his pack, kept looking at Brandt, who was looking at nothing. Ernst finished praying, stood up slowly, joints stiff from sitting on cold concrete for hours, said God had not brought him this far to die in a Soviet labor camp, said there were places in the ruins where men could shelter, said he had seen them during the fighting, deep cellars in the factory buildings, spaces under collapsed walls, tunnels that led nowhere but might lead to survival. Ludwig asked how long we could hide. No one had an answer for that. Days probably, a week perhaps, long enough to see if the Wehrmacht launched a relief operation, long enough to see if the situation changed, long enough to not be in a column of prisoners marching north toward the camps. The decision made itself the way decisions did when there were no good options. Gerhard started gathering his things, what few things there were to gather. A blanket, a canteen, his rifle with its 6 rounds. I found myself doing the same. So did Brandt, moving slowly, mechanically, like a man in a dream. Erich copied our movements. So did Ernst and Karl and Ludwig. Otto stayed sitting, wished us luck, said he would tell the Russians we had died days ago if they asked, said he would not volunteer information, but he would not lie if they pressed him. We understood. He was doing what he could. We shook his hand, left him sitting against the wall with his ruined legs stretched out in front of him. The bunker was chaos now. Russian voices on multiple levels, German officers arguing about whether to keep their sidearms or leave them. Feldwebel Weiss trying to organize some kind of orderly surrender, men streaming toward the exits with their hands up. Others moving deeper into the bunker, away from the sounds of occupation, looking for ways out that did not involve Russians. We found a service corridor that led to a storage room. The room had a door half buried in rubble, but the rubble could be moved. Behind it was a stairway that went up instead of down, toward the ruins instead of deeper into the bunker, toward the surface where the temperature was -30, but where there were no Russians. Yet, Gerhard went first, then Ernst, then Brandt, then Erich, then Ludwig, then Karl. I went last, looked back one time at the bunker, at Otto sitting against the wall, at the hundreds of men waiting to surrender, at the lamps flickering in the gloom, at the place where we had spent the last 3 weeks waiting to die. Then I climbed the stairs after the others. The door at the top was frozen shut. Took all 7 of us to force it open. When it finally gave way, daylight and cold air hit us like a physical blow. The sky was white with cloud. The ruins stretched in every direction, broken walls and collapsed buildings and smoking craters and the skeletal remains of factories. The wind cut through every layer of clothing we wore. Somewhere behind us, deep underground, the surrender was happening. Paulus giving up the 6th Army to the Russians. Thousands of men laying down their weapons. The end of 5 months of fighting, but we were not part of that surrender. We were 7 soldiers standing in the ruins of Stalingrad on the 31st of January, 1943, and we had just decided not to become prisoners of war. The decision to hide. 31st January, 1943, afternoon and night. The cold hit differently above ground. In the bunker, it had been a constant presence, seeping through concrete and settling in your bones. But up here in the ruins, it was active, aggressive, something with teeth. The wind came across the Volga and through the destroyed city without anything to stop it. 30 degrees below freezing, according to the last thermometer anyone had seen working. But numbers stopped meaning much when your face went numb in seconds and your fingers stopped responding to commands. We stood in what had been a loading area behind the department store. The building rose above us in broken sections, walls with no roofs, floors with no walls, empty window frames that framed nothing but grey sky. The loading dock itself was buried under rubble and frozen rubble and snow. Everything was the same color, grey and white and the brown of old rust. Gerhard surveyed the ruins around us without speaking. His eyes moved methodically from building to building, factory to factory, looking for something specific, though he had not said what. The rest of us waited because Gerhard was the one who had been through this before, who had survived Russian captivity once and understood what we were trying to avoid. Finally, he pointed northwest toward the factory district, said that was where we needed to go. The Red October plant, or the tractor factory, or one of the other massive industrial complexes that had been the center of the fighting for months. Said those places had deep cellars that had survived the bombing. Said the factories were so big and so destroyed that the Russians would not search every corner. Said we could find a place there. Brandt asked how far. Gerhard estimated 2 kilometers, maybe 3. Through the ruins, through streets that were no longer streets, but obstacle courses of rubble and ice and unexploded shells. 2 or 3 hours, if we were lucky. Longer, if we had to avoid patrols. Erich wanted to know if there were already Russians in the factory district. Nobody knew. The Red October had changed hands a dozen times during the fighting. Last anyone had heard it was in Soviet hands, but information was weeks old and everything changed quickly once the surrender started. We would have to move carefully and hope. We had almost nothing with us. Our rifles, 7 Carabiner 98Ks with perhaps 40 rounds total between us, a few blankets, 3 canteens, some personal items that men carry even when they should not, letters, photographs, religious items. No food. The last rations in the bunker had been distributed 2 days ago, and there would be no more. No medical supplies beyond what Ernst had stuffed in his pack, which amounted to some bandages and nothing else. No maps, because maps had been burned for warmth weeks ago. Karl asked what we would eat. The question hung in the cold air. Gerhard said we would find something, said the ruins were full of surprises, did not elaborate on what kind of surprises. His voice suggested they would not be pleasant surprises. We moved out at 3 in the afternoon, or what we thought was 3, based on the angle of the weak sun through the clouds. Stayed low, moved from cover to cover, used the rubble as concealment the way we had learned to do during the months of urban combat. The city was oddly quiet. Distant sounds of engines and voices, but nothing close. The battle was over, even if the surrender was not complete yet. The first body we passed was German. Frozen in the position he had died in, rifle still clutched in his hands, snow covering him like a burial shroud. Could not tell what unit he had been from, could not tell much of anything except that he was dead, and we were not. Eric looked away. Ludwig stopped to make the sign of the cross. The rest of us kept walking because the dead were everywhere and stopping for each one would take forever. More bodies as we moved deeper into the ruins. German, Russian, impossible to tell sometimes when they had been there long enough. The cold preserved everything, made them look like sculptures, like monuments to something nobody could name. The smell was less than it had been in summer or autumn. Winter had frozen the worst of the decay, but there was still a smell, chemical and organic and wrong. We reached the factory district after 2 hours of careful movement. The Red October plant rose up like a cathedral of destruction. Massive walls, punctured with shell holes, tall chimneys still standing somehow, the skeletal framework of buildings that had been hollowed out by fire and artillery. Everything was twisted metal and broken concrete. The whole area looked like what I imagined the end of the world would look like. Gerhard led us toward what had been the main production hall. The fighting here had been particularly savage. Every meter of ground had been contested. The walls were cratered from tank fire. The floors were covered in spent shell casings that crunched under our boots. Blood had frozen in dark pools. Equipment that had once produced steel now lay shattered and useless. We found the entrance to a cellar in the northwest corner of the building. A heavy metal door, half buried under collapsed masonry. It took all of us working together to clear enough rubble to open it. The door groaned on frozen hinges, protesting movement after months of being sealed. Beyond it was darkness and stairs leading down. Gerhard went first again. Had a working flashlight, one of the few luxuries we possessed. The beam cut through the dark as he descended. We followed in single file, Ernst, Brandt, me, Erich, Ludwig, Karl. Each step carefully placed because we could not see well, and a broken ankle down here would be a death sentence. The cellar opened up into a large space that had probably been used for storage. Concrete walls, concrete floor, concrete ceiling about 3 meters up. No windows. One other exit on the far side that led deeper into the factory complex. The Russians, or the Germans, or both, had used this place during the fighting. Ammunition crates stacked against one wall, empty ration tins scattered around, shell casings everywhere, a few sleeping rolls that someone had abandoned. Dark stains on the floor that might have been oil or might have been blood. It was freezing down here. Not as cold as outside because there was no wind, but cold enough that our breath was visible in the flashlight beam. Cold enough that we would need to do something about warmth soon, or we would not last the night. We stood in the darkness for a moment, letting our eyes adjust, taking stock of what we had found. Eric asked if this was where we were going to stay. Gerhard said it would do for now, said we could explore deeper later, but for the moment this space was defensible and hidden and better than being in a prisoner column. Brandt started organizing us the way sergeants do, told Karl and Ludwig to check the other exit, make sure we had a way out if Russians came through the main door, told Ernst and Eric to search the space for anything useful, food, water, fuel, anything. told me to help Gerhard secure the entrance, make it look undisturbed from outside. We worked in near silence, speaking only when necessary, and then in whispers. The cellar had strange acoustics. Sounds carried and echoed in ways that made it hard to judge distances. Every scrape of boot on concrete seemed amplified. Every breath seemed loud. Karl and Ludwig returned after 15 minutes, reported that the back exit led to a tunnel system that connected to other parts of the factory. Multiple branches, multiple options for escape if needed. Some tunnels collapsed, but others passable. No sign of recent occupation. Ernst and Eric found very little of use. Some empty crates that could be broken up for fuel if we found a way to build a fire without creating smoke. A few rusted tools, one intact canteen with frozen water in it. No food, no blankets beyond what we had brought. No medical supplies beyond Ernst's pathetic collection. We gathered in the center of the space. 7 men in a concrete room beneath the ruins of Stalingrad. The temperature had to be near -20. Our uniforms were designed for it, but only if you kept moving. Staying still meant freezing. The cold crept in from the floor, from the walls, from the air itself. Gerhard laid out the situation in his flat voice, said we had successfully avoided the surrender for now, said that was the easy part, said the hard part was surviving long enough for the situation to change. Said we needed water, food, warmth, and most importantly, we needed to stay hidden while the Russians conducted their cleanup operations. Brandt asked about those cleanup operations. How long would they last? How thorough would they be? Gerhard said he did not know, said the Russians would want to secure the city, collect the prisoners, establish control, said that might take days or weeks. Said they would probably search the ruins, but the ruins were enormous and the Russians had other priorities. Said if we were careful and quiet, we might go unnoticed. Eric wanted to know what happened after that, after the Russians finished their cleanup, after the city was secured. What then? The question had no good answer. Gerhard shrugged, said maybe the Wehrmacht would launch a relief operation, said maybe the situation would change. Said maybe we would figure out a way to slip through the Soviet lines and make it back to German positions. Nobody believed any of that. But saying it out loud made the decision to hide seem less insane. Made it seem like we had a plan beyond hiding in a frozen cellar until we starved or froze or went mad. The real reasons for hiding were simpler and darker. We had all heard stories about the camps, about Siberia and forced labor and mass executions. Some of it was propaganda, but some of it was based on letters from men who had been captured on other fronts and somehow gotten word back. The stories were not good. The survival rates were not good. And even if you survived the camps, there was no guarantee you would ever see Germany again. Ernst said it plainly. Said he would rather die free in Stalingrad than die as a slave in Siberia. Said God had given us this opportunity and we would be fools not to take it. His voice had that certainty that religious conviction provides, made him sound calmer than the rest of us felt. Karl was less certain. Said he had a mother in Dresden who was probably already worried sick. Said surrendering meant she would at least know eventually. Said hiding meant she might never know what happened to him, might spend the rest of her life wondering if he died or deserted or disappeared. Ludwig put a hand on his shoulder. Did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would make it better. We talked about water first, because water was most urgent. Could survive weeks without food if necessary, but only days without water. The problem was that all the water was frozen. Snow everywhere outside, but bringing snow down here meant going up and down the stairs repeatedly and leaving tracks. Gerhard suggested we wait until dark and then make one trip to collect as much as we could. Fill every container we had. Melt it down here somehow. Food was more complicated. There was no food in the cellar, probably no food anywhere in the immediate area because the city had been under siege for months and everything edible had been consumed or destroyed. Gerhard mentioned horses, dead horses frozen in the ruins, said the Germans had been eating their horses since December, said the meat would be frozen solid, but it was meat, said we would need to find some and bring it back. The thought of going back outside into the ruins to butcher frozen horse meat was grim, but it was better than starving. Erich looked sick at the suggestion. Had probably never eaten horse before Stalingrad. Would have to get used to worse than horse if we stayed down here long enough. Warmth was the most difficult problem. We could not build a fire because the smoke would give away our position, could not generate heat without fuel, and we had no fuel. The best we could do was huddle together, share body heat, use the blankets and sleeping rolls we had found. It would not be comfortable, but it might keep us from freezing. Night came early because we were in a cellar with no windows and darkness was absolute. Gerhard rationed the flashlight battery, 10 minutes of light every hour. The rest of the time we sat in complete blackness. The darkness was thick, physical, disorienting, made it hard to tell if your eyes were open or closed. In the darkness, men talked quietly. About home, about family, about anything except where we were and what we had just done. Erich talked about Leipzig before the war. Ludwig talked about farming in Bavaria. Karl talked about learning to bake bread in his father's shop. Brandt did not talk about his family, but you could tell he was thinking about them by the way he sat. Ernst prayed. Could hear him whispering Latin in the darkness. Gerhard sat apart from the rest of us. When I asked him what he was thinking about, he said he was listening to the sounds from above, trying to gauge what was happening up in the ruins, trying to figure out if the Russians were close or far, searching or not searching, a threat or not yet a threat. Around midnight, or what we guessed was midnight based on nothing but intuition, we heard something, faint at first. Engines, tracked vehicles moving through the ruins above us, Russian voices shouting orders. The sounds came and went, grew closer, then more distant, lasted perhaps 20 minutes, then silence again. We held our breath the whole time, every man frozen in place, hands on rifles even though rifles would be useless if they found us. 7 men against however many Russians were up there, but having the rifles made us feel less helpless. When the sounds faded, Gerhard whispered that it was beginning. The cleanup operations. The systematic search of the ruins. Said we needed to be absolutely silent from now on, absolutely still, absolutely invisible. Said that was how we survived. The night stretched out endlessly. Cold seeped into everything. No sleep, just a kind of semi-consciousness where you were too uncomfortable to rest properly, but too exhausted to stay fully alert. Every joint ached. Every muscle cramped. The concrete floor was like lying on ice. The blankets helped, but not enough. In the darkest part of the night, 3 or 4 in the morning probably, Erich started crying, quiet sobs that he tried to muffle. Ludwig moved closer to him, did not say anything, just sat next to him in the darkness. Eventually the crying stopped. Eventually, everything stopped except the cold and the waiting and the absolute silence we needed to maintain. By morning, which we only knew had come because Gerhard checked his watch with the flashlight, we were all shivering uncontrollably. The cold had gone beyond discomfort into something dangerous. Gerhard said we needed to move soon, needed to go up, collect water, find food, do something active before hypothermia set in properly. But we also needed to wait, needed to let the daylight bring better visibility, needed to be sure the Russians had moved on, needed to not make a mistake in the first 12 hours that would get us all killed or captured. So we waited. 7 frozen soldiers in a concrete cellar beneath the ruins of Stalingrad, hidden from the surrender that was happening above us, hidden from the Russians who were securing the city, hidden from everything except the cold and the hunger and the question of how long we could possibly survive like this. Gerhard checked his watch again, said it was 9 in the morning on the 1st of February, said we had made it through the first night, said the next night would be harder. Nobody disagreed with him. The silence after the battle. 1st to 2nd February 1943. The silence was worse than the fighting had been. For months the city had been a constant roar of artillery and mortars and machine guns and aircraft and everything else that made the sound of modern war. Even in the bunker you could hear it, muffled by concrete but always present, a background noise that became so familiar you stopped noticing it. Your ears adjusted. Your mind filtered it out. But now, on the 1st of February, the city was quiet, not completely silent. There were still sounds, engines in the distance, occasional rifle shots, the creak and groan of buildings settling. But the sustained roar was gone. The battle was over, even if not everyone had gotten the message yet. The quiet felt unnatural, made you aware of every small sound, every breath, every movement, every scrape of boot on concrete in the cellar. We spent the morning of the 1st listening to the sounds from above, trying to interpret them, trying to understand what was happening up there in the ruins. Soviet voices came and went, trucks or tracked vehicles moving through what had been streets, the metallic clang of equipment being moved or sorted, orders being shouted in Russian, sharp syllables that carried in the cold air even down to where we hid. Gerhard sat near the entrance with his ear close to the door, listening intently. Occasionally he would report what he heard, vehicles to the north, voices to the east, silence to the west. He was building a mental map of Soviet activity, trying to find patterns, trying to figure out when it would be safe to move. We needed water desperately, had finished what was in our canteens during the night. The cold made you less thirsty than you would be in summer, but you still needed water, or you would die just as surely as from bullets. Gerhard said we would wait until afternoon when the Soviets might be less active. Said we would go up in pairs, collect snow quickly, get back down before anyone noticed. Around midday, Gerhard checked his watch, said it was 11:45. We heard something different. Sustained rifle fire from the north, not the scattered shots we had been hearing all morning, but a real exchange, dozens of rounds, maybe hundreds, lasting 5 or 6 minutes before stopping as abruptly as it started. Brandt asked what it meant. Gerhard said probably the northern pocket. General Strecker's forces said they had not surrendered yet, said they were still resisting. The gunfire confirmed it. Somewhere to the north, Germans were still fighting. Still dying, still refusing to give up, even though the situation was hopeless. The firing stopped. The silence returned, heavier now, more oppressive. Erich asked if we should try to reach the northern pocket, try to join them. Gerhard looked at him like he was insane, said the northern pocket was surrounded and would fall within hours or days at most, said reaching them would mean crossing kilometers of Soviet-controlled ruins, said it was suicide. Erich did not argue, just nodded and went back to sitting against the wall. We were all shivering. Had been shivering since the previous evening, but now it was worse, uncontrollable. Your whole body shook, and there was nothing you could do to stop it. The cold had penetrated every layer of clothing, every blanket, every attempt at insulation. The concrete floor seemed to radiate cold upward. The walls radiated cold inward. The air itself was cold enough to hurt your lungs. Ernst led us in exercises, simple movements to generate body heat, knee bends, arm swings, walking in place. It helped temporarily, got blood moving, made you feel slightly warmer for 10 or 15 minutes. Then the cold came back and you had to do it again. We did exercises every hour. It was exhausting, but it kept us from freezing. Karl found the other soldier in the afternoon. He had been exploring the back tunnels with Ludwig, looking for additional exits or resources or anything useful. They found a side room about 50 meters from our main space. Small concrete chamber that had probably been used for tools or equipment. The other soldier was in there. Karl and Ludwig carried him back to our cellar. He was German, that much was obvious from the uniform. Obergefreiter rank, older, maybe 40, had been wounded badly. Left leg was a mess of frozen blood and torn flesh and something that looked like exposed bone. The leg should have been amputated weeks ago, but there had been no surgeons and no time and no supplies. Now gangrene had set in. Could smell it even in the cold, sweet and rotten and chemical. The man was barely conscious, muttered things that made no sense. Sometimes spoke clearly for a moment, then faded back into delirium. Ernst checked him with what little medical knowledge he had. Said the gangrene had spread. Said there was nothing we could do. Said it was a matter of hours, maybe a day. We made him as comfortable as possible, put blankets over him, gave him some of our precious water. He drank without really understanding what he was doing. His eyes were unfocused. His skin had that grey-yellow color that meant the body was shutting down. His name was Wolfgang. We learned that much from his identification tags. Obergefreiter Wolfgang Richter, from Stuttgart. 29 years old, according to the birth date stamped on the metal. Had probably been in this cellar for days or weeks. Surviving somehow on melted snow and nothing else, hiding from the surrender, hiding from the Russians, hiding until his body gave out. He died around 6 in the evening on the 1st of February, stopped breathing while we were doing our hourly exercises. Just stopped. One moment there was that wet, rasping sound of his breathing, the next moment silence. Ernst checked for a pulse, shook his head. Wolfgang was gone. We sat with the body for a while. Nobody spoke. What was there to say? He had been a stranger an hour ago. Now he was a dead stranger in our cellar, another casualty of Stalingrad, one of hundreds of thousands. Nothing special about him except that he was here with us, and now he was dead. The practical question was what to do with the body. We could not take it outside without risk of being seen, could not bury it because the ground was frozen solid, could not burn it because that would create smoke and smell. The only option was to move it to one of the side chambers, put it somewhere out of the way, leave it in the cold where it would freeze and not decay. Karl and Ludwig carried Wolfgang to the room where they had found him, laid him on the floor, covered him with a tarp they found. That was all we could do. Gerhard said a few words, not prayers exactly, more like acknowledgement. Said Wolfgang had fought well, had survived longer than most would have, had died free instead of in a camp. It was the best any of us could hope for. After that, we did not talk much. The night of the 1st was worse than the night before. Colder somehow, darker. The cold had gotten into us in a way that exercises could not fix. Your body stopped generating heat properly, started shutting down non-essential functions. Your fingers and toes went numb first, then your face, then your core temperature started dropping, and that was when real danger began. We huddled together more tightly, 7 bodies pressed against each other, trying to share whatever warmth we had. It helped, but not enough. The shivering was violent now, made your teeth chatter, made your whole body shake so hard it was difficult to think clearly. Ulrich asked if we were going to freeze to death. Nobody answered because the answer was yes if we did not figure something out. Gerhard said we needed fuel, needed to build a small fire, just enough to take the edge off the cold, just enough to get core temperatures back up. But fire meant smoke, and smoke meant discovery, and discovery meant death or capture. Brandt suggested we wait one more night, see if we could survive it. Then make a decision about fire based on how desperate the situation became. It was not a good plan, but it was the only plan we had. The darkness played tricks on your mind, made you see things that were not there, made you hear sounds that did not exist. Your brain tried to fill in the sensory void and got it wrong. Several times during the night someone would jerk awake, if you could call it awake when you had not really been sleeping, and ask if others had heard something. Footsteps, voices, movement, but there was nothing, Just the darkness and the cold and 7 men slowly freezing. Ernst prayed constantly. His voice was the only consistent sound. Latin words that meant nothing to most of us, but seemed to give him comfort. Sometimes others joined in. Fragments of prayers learned as children, half-remembered words that came back in extremis. It did not make us warmer, but it made the darkness less absolute. Morning came eventually. Always did, even when you were certain it would not. Gerhard checked his watch with the flashlight, said it was the 2nd of February, said we had survived 2 nights. His voice had no triumph in it, just stated the fact. 2 nights down, however many more to go. The sounds from above had changed. More organized now, less random. The Soviets were consolidating control, establishing order. The immediate chaos of surrender was over, and now came administration, collection of prisoners, inventory of captured equipment, securing of the city. And most relevantly for us, clean-up operations. We heard them clearly on the morning of the 2nd, systematic sounds, doors being kicked in, rooms being searched, commands in Russian. The search was methodical, building by building, room by room. The Soviets were making sure they had found everyone, making sure there were no holdouts, no pockets of resistance, no soldiers hiding in cellars waiting to cause problems. The sounds came from the south, perhaps 200 meters away, perhaps less. Difficult to judge distance when you were underground, and sounds echoed strangely through the ruins, but they were coming closer. That much was certain. We armed ourselves, checked our rifles, counted our ammunition one more time, even though we knew exactly how many rounds we had. 43 total, 6 or 7 bullets per man. Enough for one brief firefight. Enough to resist, but not enough to win. Not against however many Russians were out there conducting the search. Gerhard said we would not fight unless we had no choice. Said if they found us, we would surrender. Said 43 bullets against the entire Red Army was not courage, it was stupidity. Some of the others looked like they wanted to argue, but nobody did. We all knew he was right. The sounds grew closer through the morning. Crashes and bangs and shouts, the systematic destruction or investigation of every space. We heard grenades being thrown into suspicious areas. Heard the distinct thump of explosives in confined spaces. The Russians were being thorough, not taking chances, not assuming empty meant safe. Around noon, the sounds were very close. Right above us, perhaps, in the main hall of the factory building. We could hear boots on the floor directly overhead, could hear voices, could hear equipment being moved. 7 men sat absolutely still in the cellar below, barely breathing, rifles ready, waiting. The door at the top of our stairs rattled. Someone testing it, trying to see if it was locked or just stuck. The handle turned. The door moved slightly against the rubble we had piled on our side. There was a conversation in Russian, 2 voices, discussing whether to force it open, discussing whether it was worth the effort. The conversation lasted perhaps 30 seconds, felt like 30 hours. Then one of the voices said something final, definitive. The door stopped rattling. The boots moved away. The voices faded. They had decided not to force it, had decided this particular door was not worth investigating, had moved on to other areas, other buildings, other spaces that looked more promising. We sat frozen for another 10 minutes. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, just waited to see if they came back, if they changed their minds, if they decided one more door should be checked, but they did not come back. The sounds moved away, north and east, other parts of the factory complex, other ruins. The systematic search continued, but it had passed us by. We had not been found, not yet. Gerhard finally broke the silence, whispered that we had been lucky, very lucky. Said the rubble blocking the door had probably saved us, made the door look more stuck than it was, made it look like less of a priority, said we could not count on being lucky again. We needed water immediately. Had gone more than 24 hours without any. Your body could tolerate cold better than it could tolerate dehydration. The cold made you less aware of thirst, but the thirst was still there, still killing you, just slower and quieter. Gerhard and I volunteered to go up. Everyone else was either too weak or too frightened or both. We waited until mid-afternoon, when the search sounds had moved well to the north. Then we carefully moved the rubble from our door, opened it slowly, peered out into the grey light. The factory floor above was devastated, shell holes in the roof, letting in weak sunlight, twisted machinery everywhere, scorch marks from fires, spent shell casings by the thousands, dark stains that were certainly blood. But no Russians, no movement, just the ruins and the cold and the silence. We moved quickly, filled every container we had with snow, stuffed snow into our uniforms, packed it into blankets, collected as much as we could carry. The whole operation took less than 3 minutes. Then back down the stairs, door closed, rubble replaced, hidden again. The snow melted slowly in the cellar. We had no heat source, so we held the containers against our bodies. Let body heat melt it into water. It took hours, but eventually we had water to drink. Metallic tasting, cold enough to hurt your teeth, but water nonetheless. That night, the second night, we heard the northern pocket fall. Heavy firing around 6 in the evening, sustained for perhaps 20 minutes. Then it tapered off. Then scattered shots, then nothing. Strecker had surrendered. The last organized German resistance in Stalingrad was over. Now there were only men like us, hidden, scattered, holding out for reasons we could not fully articulate even to ourselves. The silence that followed was absolute. No more distant firing, no more evidence that Germans still fought anywhere in the city, just us in our cellar, and however many others might be hiding in other cellars. And the Russians above, securing their victory. Erich cried again that night, quietly into his blanket. Ludwig sat with him like before. Karl looked like he might start crying too, but held it in. Brandt stared at nothing. Ernst prayed. Gerhard listened at the door. I sat with my back against the cold concrete wall and tried to remember what warmth felt like. Tried to remember what it was like to not be cold, to not be hungry, to not be terrified. Could not remember. Felt like we had always been in this cellar, always been cold, always been waiting to either freeze or be discovered. By morning of the 3rd, Gerhard confirmed it was the 3rd with his watch. We had survived 2 full days in hiding. The shivering had not stopped. The cold had not gotten better. Wolfgang's body was frozen solid in the side chamber. Our water supply was minimal. Our food supply was non-existent. But we were still hidden, still undiscovered. Still free in whatever limited sense that word had meaning anymore. Gerhard said the worst was yet to come. Nobody disagreed. The cleanup begins. 3rd to 4th February, 1943. The 3rd morning brought new sounds. Dogs. Not the occasional bark you might hear from some stray that had survived the siege. These were working dogs, military dogs, moving in packs through the ruins with handlers directing them. Their barking echoed off the broken walls and through the empty spaces. Sometimes close, sometimes distant, always unsettling because dogs could smell what humans could not see. Gerhard listened at the door for an hour after we first heard them. Said they were German shepherds, probably. Said the Russians used them for tracking and detection. Said they could smell bodies under rubble, could smell humans hiding in places that looked empty, could find things the cleanup teams would miss. He said this in his usual flat voice, but his hands were checking his rifle. Making sure it was ready, making sure the bolt moved smoothly in the cold. The rest of us did the same. Checked our weapons for the 3rd or 4th time that morning, even though they had not changed since the last check. We had 38 rounds now, had fired 5 during a discussion that turned into an argument that almost turned into violence. Brandt had stopped it before anyone got hurt, But the shots had been fired into the concrete wall where they could not hurt anyone. 5 rounds wasted because men under extreme stress do not always make rational decisions. The argument had been about whether to leave, whether to try to slip through Soviet lines and make it back to German positions. Rudolf Krauss had been the main advocate. Unteroffizier Rudolf Krause, 30 years old, had been with us from the beginning but had never fully committed to the idea of hiding, had always talked about escape, about finding a way west, about not just waiting in a hole to freeze. On the morning of the 3rd, he had pushed the issue hard, said we had been lucky so far but luck ran out, said the Russians were conducting systematic searches with dogs and grenades and flamethrowers, said it was only a matter of time before they found us, said we should move while we still could, while we still had strength to move. Gerhard had disagreed, said moving now was suicide, said the entire city was crawling with Soviet troops. Said even if we made it out of the factory, we would be spotted within a kilometer. Said the cold would kill us before we got 10 kilometers west. Said our best chance was to stay hidden and wait. The argument had escalated. Voices rising. Old tensions surfacing. Krauss had grabbed his rifle. Brandt had stepped between them. The rifle had gone off. Whether intentionally or accidentally, nobody was entirely sure. The bullet hit concrete. Then 4 more shots in quick succession as Krauss proved some point about commitment or defiance or desperation. After that, Krauss had made his decision, said he was leaving, said anyone who wanted to come with him could. Bruno Zimmermann had volunteered. Gefreiter Bruno Zimmermann, 23, had been quiet throughout our time in the cellar, but apparently had been thinking the same thoughts as Krauss. The 2 of them packed their minimal belongings, took their rifles and their shares of ammunition, prepared to leave. We did not try to stop them. Each man had to make his own choice. Krauss and Zimmermann chose movement over hiding, chose the possibility of action over the certainty of waiting. They left through the back tunnels on the morning of the 3rd, said they would head west through the factory complex, try to find a way out of the Soviet perimeter, try to make it to German lines. We never saw them again. Never knew if they made it or were captured or were shot or froze to death in the ruins. They just disappeared into the tunnel system and did not come back. Now we were 5 instead of 7. The reduction in numbers changed the dynamic, made the cellar feel emptier, made the darkness darker, made each sound more significant because there were fewer of us to share the fear. Eric took it particularly hard, had formed some kind of bond with Zimmermann during the past days. Kept asking if we thought they would make it. Nobody answered because we all knew they would not. The dogs came closer around midday on the 3rd. Very close, directly above us perhaps, barking frantically, scratching at something, the handlers shouting commands in Russian, the dogs responding, more barking, more scratching, the sound of rubble being moved. We sat absolutely motionless, 5 men frozen in position, barely breathing. The dogs were right there, right above our ceiling, separated from us by 3 meters of concrete and whatever rubble was piled on the floor above. Could they smell us through all that? Could they detect human scent through concrete? The barking continued for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15. The handlers seemed interested in whatever the dogs had found, seemed to be investigating thoroughly. We heard tools, shovels maybe, metal on stone, the sound of debris being cleared. Then a voice, different from the handlers. An officer probably based on the tone of authority, giving orders, a brief discussion. Then the sounds started moving away. The dogs stopped barking in our location, started barking somewhere else. The cleanup team moved on to another area. After they left, we waited another hour before speaking. Finally, Gerhard whispered that they had probably found Wolfgang. The dogs had smelled the body in the side chamber. The team had investigated, but found only a corpse. decided it was not worth more effort, moved on. Wolfgang had saved us. His body had drawn the attention away from our hiding space, had satisfied the dog's detection without revealing that we were there too. It was a grim thought, but true. The dead protecting the living in the most literal sense. The afternoon of the 3rd brought different sounds, explosions, not artillery or mortars from a battle. These were demolitions, controlled explosions. The Russians were blowing up buildings, or clearing rubble, or destroying things that might be useful to holdouts. The explosions came from various directions, never a pattern, sometimes close, sometimes far. Each one made us flinch, made us wonder if the next one would be our cellar collapsing. We heard voices more frequently now too. Russian patrols moving through the factory complex, checking areas, marking buildings as cleared or not cleared. Sometimes the voices were casual. Soldiers talking normally, complaining about the cold or the work or the officers. Sometimes the voices were sharp, commands, warnings, the tone of men who expected trouble. And sometimes we heard other voices, German voices, brief exchanges before they were cut off. Sometimes silence after, sometimes gunfire. The Russians were finding holdouts, finding soldiers like us who had refused to surrender. What happened next varied. Sometimes the Germans gave up peacefully, sometimes they did not. On the evening of the 3rd, we heard one such encounter clearly, perhaps 100 meters away. German voice shouting something about surrender, Russian voices responding, a conversation we could not fully make out. Then a burst of automatic fire, PPSH submachine gun, distinctive sound, 30 or 40 rounds. Then silence. Brandt said something about how it could have been us, how if we had been in a different cellar we might have been discovered. Might have been given the choice of coming out or dying in place. Nobody responded, because what was there to say? It could have been us. It still might be us. We were not special, just lucky so far. The cold was doing strange things to our minds by the 3rd night. The sustained hypothermia was affecting cognition, making thoughts sluggish, making it hard to concentrate, making it difficult to distinguish between what was real and what was imagined. Erich started talking to people who were not there. Conversations with his mother, with friends from Leipzig, full discussions where he spoke both parts. The rest of us let him do it, was not hurting anyone, probably helped him cope. Ludwig occasionally responded to things Erich said, as if the imaginary people were real, played along, made it easier. Karl stopped talking almost entirely, would respond if directly addressed, but otherwise said nothing. Just sat against the wall and stared at the darkness. His breathing had become shallow, his movements had become slow. Ernst tried to engage him, tried to get him to pray or exercise or do anything. Karl just shook his head and went back to staring. I was having trouble remembering why we were there, not in the philosophical sense, but in the literal sense. Would sometimes forget that we were hiding from Russians, would think we were waiting for orders, or waiting for relief, or waiting for something else entirely. Then awareness would snap back and I would remember surrender, hiding, survival, the sequence of events that had led to this frozen cellar. Gerhard seemed least affected, maybe because he was older, maybe because he had been through worse in the First War, maybe because his mind was just built differently. He maintained his routines, checked the door regularly, monitored sounds from above, made sure we did our exercises every hour, kept us functional, even as we deteriorated. On the morning of the 4th, we heard flamethrowers, distinctive sound, the whoosh of ignited fuel, the roar of sustained flame, happening somewhere to the east, close enough to hear clearly, close enough to smell smoke a few minutes later. The Russians were burning out cellars, burning out hiding places, making sure nothing survived that might cause problems later. The smell of smoke was faint but present, chemical smell. Burning oil or gasoline mixed with something else, something organic, We did not discuss what that something else might be. All knew, but none wanted to say it. Later that morning, more flamethrowers. To the north, then to the south. A systematic pattern emerging. The Russians were being thorough, not just searching with dogs and grenades, but actively eliminating potential hiding places, making the city secure. Brandt asked Gerhard if he thought they would burn this cellar. Gerhard said probably not. Said the main factory building was too large, too much concrete, too difficult to burn effectively. Said they would save flamethrowers for smaller spaces, wooden structures, places that would burn easily. He said this with confidence, but his hands were checking his rifle again. The food situation became critical on the fourth day. We had not eaten in 4 days. Your body can survive a long time without food, but the cold made it worse. Without calories, you could not generate heat. Without heat, your core temperature dropped. Without warmth, you became lethargic and confused, and eventually, you just stopped. We needed food soon, or we would start dying of starvation instead of exposure. Gerhard said we had to go out, had to find something edible, had to take the risk, because staying in the cellar without food was certain death. Going out was only probable death. Probability was better than certainty. We drew lots to see who would go, used shell casings, 3 short, 2 long. Gerhard and I drew short. Plus Brandt drew short. The 3 of us would go on the evening of the 4th. Look for food, anything edible, horse meat if we could find it, anything frozen that could be brought back. We waited until dark, until the sounds from above had mostly quieted, until the patrols seemed less frequent. Then we prepared to move, checked our rifles, took empty packs to carry whatever we found. Agreed on signals and routes and what to do if we got separated. The door opened with less noise than I expected. We had been oiling the hinges with gun oil, making sure it would not squeak, making sure we could move quietly when we needed to. The 3 of us slipped out and up the stairs, into the ruined factory floor, into the night. The cold hit like a physical blow. Had been cold in the cellar, but this was different. This was wind and open air, and temperatures that would kill you in hours if you were not moving. The moon was out, quarter moon, enough light to see by, enough light to be seen by. We moved carefully through the ruins, used the shadows, used the cover, stayed low. The factory floor was a maze of twisted metal and broken concrete, easy to make noise, easy to trip, easy to give yourself away. We moved one at a time, one moving while the others covered, slow but safe. Gerhard led us toward the southern edge of the factory complex. Said he remembered seeing dead horses there during the battle. Said they would be frozen solid, but that was fine. Frozen meat could be thawed. Frozen meat was still meat. We found the first horse after 20 minutes of careful movement. Russian horse. Still had the harness on, had been dead for weeks probably. Frozen in a half-collapsed position. We approached carefully, checked for booby traps. The Russians sometimes trapped bodies, sometimes mined obvious resources, but this one seemed clean. Gerhard used his knife to hack off a piece of the haunch. The meat was frozen harder than wood, took sustained effort to cut through. The sound of metal on frozen flesh seemed incredibly loud in the quiet night. We worked quickly, got 10 kilos of meat, maybe 15, stuffed it into our packs. Then we heard voices, Russian voices, close, maybe 50 meters away, coming from the north. Patrol, probably. Walking through the ruins, checking for activity. We froze, pressed ourselves against the nearest wall, tried to be invisible. The voices came closer. 2 men, maybe 3, talking casually. Cigarette smoke visible in the moonlight. Flashlights sweeping randomly, not searching methodically, just walking through. Routine patrol. They passed within 10 meters of us. 10 meters. Close enough to hear their breathing. Close enough to smell their tobacco. Close enough to hear one of them complain about the cold in Russian. We did not move, did not breathe, just waited. They moved past, voices fading, continuing their patrol route, going wherever their orders said to go, unaware that 3 German soldiers were pressed against a wall watching them. We waited 5 minutes after they were gone. Then we moved, quickly now, back toward the factory, back toward our cellar. The meat weighed heavily in our packs, slowed us down, made movement awkward. But we had food now. That was what mattered. We were 20 meters from our entrance when we heard the grenade, not close, maybe 100 meters to the west, but the sound carried, the flat bang of an explosion in a confined space, then shouting, Russian voices, commands, then automatic weapons fire, then silence. They had found someone, some other cellar, some other group of Germans hiding. The encounter had not gone peacefully. Now, whoever had been hiding there was dead or captured. Another group eliminated, another hiding place discovered and cleared. We got back to our cellar entrance, got down the stairs, got the door closed and secured, got the rubble back in place. Then we sat in the darkness, catching our breath, listening for sounds that would indicate the patrol had heard us, had followed us, had found our entrance. No sounds came. We had made it, had gotten food, had not been discovered. Not this time. Erich and Karl and Ernst were waiting, saw the meat. Their eyes went wide. We had brought salvation, frozen salvation, but salvation nonetheless. 15 kilos of horse meat split 5 ways was 3 kilos per person, enough for days, maybe a week if we rationed carefully. The meat thawed slowly. We had no fire, so we held chunks against our bodies. Let body heat slowly bring it from frozen to merely cold. It took hours, but eventually we could chew it. The meat was tough and tasteless, and probably diseased, but it was protein and calories and exactly what we needed. We ate without speaking, tore off pieces with our teeth, chewed mechanically, swallowed. It did not taste like food, did not satisfy in any normal sense, but we could feel the calories entering our systems, could feel energy returning, could feel the edge of desperation pulling back slightly. After we ate, Gerhard told us what he had seen outside, the patrols, the sweeps. The systematic nature of the cleanup, said the Russians were being thorough but not perfect, said there were gaps in their coverage, said it was possible to move if you were careful, said we had proven that. But he also said the explosions and fire and dogs would continue, said the cleanup was intensifying, not decreasing, said more teams were working the ruins every day, said our chances of remaining undiscovered were dropping with each passing hour. Brandt asked him directly what he thought our odds were, of surviving, of staying hidden long enough for the situation to change. Gerhard took a long time to answer, finally said he did not know. Said we were in a game where the rules kept changing. Said luck only lasted so long. The night of the 4th was marginally better than the previous nights. We had food in our stomachs, had protein and calories generating heat. The shivering was still there, but less violent. The cold was still omnipresent but more bearable. Sleep came easier, not real sleep, but at least the semi-consciousness was deeper. But we also knew what we had heard that evening, the grenade, the gunfire, the cleanup operation finding and eliminating another group. We knew we were next if our luck ran out, knew that every day that passed made discovery more likely, knew that the choice we had made to hide was looking more questionable with each passing hour. Ernst prayed longer that night. Ludwig stayed close to Erich. Karl remained silent. Brandt checked his rifle. Gerhard listened at the door. I lay against the cold concrete and tried to remember what day it was, tried to count backwards, tried to orient myself in time. Surrender had been 4 days ago, 4 days since we had walked away from the Univermag bunker, 4 days of hiding in this frozen cellar, 4 days of cold and fear and waiting. How many more days could we last? Nobody knew. Physical collapse. 5th to 6th February 1943. By the 5th day, our bodies were failing in ways that went beyond cold and hunger. The horse meat had helped, had given us calories and protein, had stopped the immediate decline towards starvation, but it could not fix the damage that had already been done, could not reverse the hypothermia that had set into our bones, could not restore the reserves we had burned through in 4 days of freezing in a concrete cellar. The shivering had changed. Was no longer the violent whole-body shaking of the earlier days. Now it came in waves, sometimes intense, sometimes absent. When it stopped, that was worse because it meant your core temperature had dropped below the point where your body could generate the response, below 32 degrees, into the danger zone where confusion and loss of coordination began. Eric could not feel his hands anymore. His fingers had gone from painful to numb to nothing. The skin was grey-white. The fingertips were black. Frostbite had set in deeply. Gerhard examined them with the flashlight, said nothing, but his face said everything. Those fingers were dead, would have to be amputated if we ever got out of here, if there was ever an if. Karl was worse. Had stopped responding to questions, would open his eyes if you shook him, but seemed to look through you rather than at you. His lips were cracked and bleeding. His breathing was shallow. When Brandt tried to get him to eat some of the horse meat, he just stared at the food without comprehension. Eventually, Ernst forced some into his mouth. Karl chewed mechanically but did not seem to know what he was doing. The cold had gotten inside all of us in a way that was hard to describe. It was not just external anymore, not just something you felt on your skin. It had penetrated deeper into muscle, into organs, into the core of your body where warmth was supposed to be maintained no matter what. That core was failing, the body's last defenses breaking down. We were in the middle stage of hypothermia, between mild and severe, the stage where mental function deteriorated, where motor skills failed, where your body started making strange decisions about resource allocation, where paradoxical undressing sometimes happened, the confusion causing people to remove clothing because their broken thermoregulation made them feel hot when they were freezing. Gerhard watched us all carefully, watched for signs of that confusion, watched for signs that someone was about to do something dangerous because their brain was no longer processing information correctly. He made us check each other every hour, made us confirm that everyone still had their coats on, still had their boots laced, still had basic awareness of where they were. The water situation had become critical again. We had finished what we collected on the 4th, had melted snow against our bodies, but that took hours and yielded very little. We needed more, but going outside meant risk, and risk meant potential discovery, and discovery meant death or capture. On the afternoon of the 5th, Gerhard and I went out again. Same routine as before. Wait for relative quiet. Move fast. Get what you need, get back. We filled every container with snow, made the trip in under 5 minutes. Nobody saw us, nobody shot at us. Small victories. But the dehydration had already done damage. Your body needed water to function, needed it to think clearly, needed it to regulate temperature. Without enough water, the blood thickened. The brain worked less efficiently. Coordination suffered. Judgment suffered. Everything suffered. Brandt started talking about his children on the evening of the 5th. Long monologues about his daughter, who would be 7 now, about his son, who would be 5, about whether they would remember him, about whether his wife had told them he was dead yet or was still holding out hope. The monologues were detailed, specific, full of memories that might have been real or might have been fabricated by a mind that was starting to break down. Nobody stopped him, let him talk. It helped him and did not hurt us. We all had our own ways of coping. Brandt talked about his family. Ernst prayed continuously. Eric talked to people who were not there. Karl said nothing at all. Gerhard focused on practical tasks. I tried to count things. Count the minutes, count the rounds of ammunition, count the days, anything to keep the mind engaged. On the morning of the 6th, we found that Karl had wet himself during the night. had lost control of his bladder while unconscious or sleeping or whatever state he had been in. The urine had frozen. His trousers were frozen to his legs. The smell was faint because everything was too cold for normal decay, but it was there. We tried to clean him up, tried to get the frozen clothing off, but his body temperature was so low that removing layers might kill him. Gerhard said to leave it, said Karl was already too far gone, said trying to help might make it worse. So we left him in his frozen, urine-soaked trousers and covered him with blankets and hoped he would somehow recover. He did not recover. The food helped our bodies, but not our minds. The horse meat was hard to digest, made our stomachs cramp, made us feel simultaneously full and empty. The protein gave us energy, but it was a strange, dissociated energy. You could move, but your movements felt disconnected from your intentions. You could think, but your thoughts took longer to form and came out confused. Eric started seeing things on the 6th day, shadows moving in the darkness, figures standing in corners. He would point and ask if we saw them too. We would say no. He would insist they were there. Eventually he stopped asking and just watched them, talked to them sometimes, nodded at their responses that only he could hear. Ernst said these were visions, said God was showing Eric things, said it was a blessing. Gerhard said it was hypothermia and dehydration and the brain failing, said there was nothing blessed about it. They argued about this quietly for 10 minutes before Brandt told them both to shut up. Said it did not matter what caused the visions, only mattered that Eric was not hurting anyone. The sounds from above had decreased. The systematic cleanup was winding down or moving to other parts of the city, or complete. Hard to say. We heard occasional patrols, occasional voices, but nothing like the intensive activity of days 3 and 4. Either they had found everyone or they had given up looking. Either way, it suggested the worst of the danger had passed, or it suggested we were already dead and had just not noticed yet. I had that thought more than once on the 6th day, the thought that we had actually died already, that this was some kind of afterlife or hallucination, that the cellar was not real, that the cold and hunger were not real, that we were already gone, and this was just our minds processing death. Gerhard said this was normal, said extreme conditions produced extreme thoughts, said the mind tried to make sense of things that did not make sense, and sometimes invented explanations that were worse than reality. Said to ignore it, said to focus on immediate tasks, on breathing, on moving, on staying alive in the present moment. The present moment was brutal. Your lips cracked when you tried to speak, bled when you tried to eat. The skin on your face felt like leather, tight and dry and ready to split. Your eyes were constantly irritated. The cold air dried them out, made blinking painful, made seeing difficult in the already difficult darkness. Your joints stopped working properly. Knees and elbows and shoulders became stiff. Moving them took conscious effort. The cartilage seemed to grind. The synovial fluid seemed to have frozen. Every motion hurt in a deep, aching way that never stopped. Your muscles cramped constantly. Calves and thighs and back muscles would suddenly seize up, lock in position, cause pain that made you gasp. You would have to wait for it to pass, massage the cramped muscle, try to work the spasm out. It would relax eventually, then a different muscle would cramp. The cycle continued endlessly. On the afternoon of the 6th, Karl stopped breathing. Nobody noticed at first. He had been so still for so long that stillness seemed normal. But then Erich said something about Karl being too quiet. Ernst checked him, put a hand in front of his mouth, felt for breath. There was none. Checked for a pulse, found nothing. Karl Wagner was dead, 20 years old, from Dresden, had wanted to be a baker like his father, had believed we would somehow survive this, had held onto optimism longer than the rest of us. Now he was a frozen corpse in a Stalingrad cellar, another casualty that nobody would count. Another soldier who had not surrendered but had not survived either. We went through his pockets, found a letter from his mother, dated November, had been carried for 3 months, was still with him when he died. We left it with the body. Seemed wrong to take it, seemed wrong to read it, was between Karl and his mother and nobody else. We carried him to the side chamber where Wolfgang was, laid him next to the older soldier. 2 bodies now. 2 Germans who had refused surrender and had paid the price. We covered Karl with a blanket, said a few words. Ernst prayed properly this time, Latin phrases that sounded appropriate even if none of us except Ernst knew what they meant. After that, we were 5. 5 men in a cellar that had held 8 at the start, 3 gone from the group, 2 dead, 3 who had left and disappeared. The reduction in numbers made everything seem more desperate, made the space feel bigger, made the darkness darker, made each sound more significant because there were fewer of us to share the burden of fear. That night, the 6th night, was when we had the discussion about leaving. Not leaving like Krauss and Zimmermann had left. Not trying to escape west, but leaving meaning giving up, walking out, surrendering to whatever Russians we found, taking our chances with the camps rather than continuing to freeze in this hole. Erich raised it first. Said he could not feel most of his body anymore. Said he was having conversations with people who were not there. Said he was not sure what was real and what was imaginary. Said maybe surrender was better than this. Maybe the camps were bad, but they could not be worse than this, could they? Gerhard said they could. Reminded us of the statistics. 91,000 prisoners taken. Maybe half would survive the march to the camps. Maybe half of those would survive the first year. Maybe a few would ever see Germany again. Single-digit survival rates. Said that was documented. Said that was not propaganda. But Erich said at least it was a decision. At least it was action. Said hiding here was passive, was waiting to die, was not really surviving, just postponing death. Said he would rather die trying to live than die waiting to freeze. Brandt surprised us by agreeing. Said he had been thinking similar thoughts. Said his children needed to know what happened to him. Said surrendering meant there would be records. The Russians would document prisoners. Eventually, his family would find out. But dying here meant disappearing. Meant his wife would never know. Would spend the rest of her life wondering. Ernst disagreed strongly, said God had not brought us this far to give up, said we had survived 6 days when others had not, said that meant something, said we had to have faith, said surrender was abandoning faith, was giving up on divine providence, was accepting defeat. Gerhard said he did not care about God or providence or any of that, said he cared about survival and the statistics favored hiding over surrendering. Said we had made it almost a week. Said the cleanup operations were decreasing. Said if we could last another week, the danger would pass. Said our best chance was still here in this cellar. I stayed out of the discussion, could see both sides, could see why someone would want to surrender. Could see why someone would want to continue hiding. Did not know which choice was right, did not think there was a right choice, just different ways to die. We voted, 5 of us. 3 to continue hiding, 2 to surrender. The decision was made. We would stay, at least for now, at least for another day, reevaluate tomorrow if anyone still wanted to leave. But everyone knew that tomorrow several of us might be too weak to leave, might be too hypothermic to walk. Might have passed the point where surrender was even an option. The window for choosing was closing. We settled in for another night. 5 men now instead of 8. 2 bodies in the side chamber, all of us damaged in ways that would never fully heal. All of us aware that we were approaching the limit of human endurance. Gerhard checked his watch, said it was the 6th of February, said we had survived 6 days in hiding, said the question now was not if we would die, but when and how. Nobody disagreed. The end. 7th February 1943, nobody slept on the 6th night. We sat in the darkness and waited for dawn, waited for the decision we had already made, even though nobody had said it out loud yet. we were done. 6 nights in the cellar had broken something fundamental. Not just our bodies, something deeper, the will to continue suffering without end. Gerhard said it first as grey light began filtering down through cracks in the cellar door. Said we should go out, said we should find Russians, said we should surrender while we still could, while we still had enough strength to walk, while we were still technically alive. Nobody argued. Erich nodded slowly. Brandt closed his eyes and exhaled. Ernst made the sign of the cross. I said nothing because there was nothing to say. We all knew this was the only option left. The preparation was simple. We destroyed our weapons, could not surrender with loaded rifles, could not give the Russians any excuse to shoot us on sight. Gerhard used a rock to smash his rifle's firing mechanism, bent the bolt, made the weapon inoperable. The rest of us did the same. The sound of metal on metal echoed in the cellar. Final percussion, last military act. We kept nothing that could be considered a weapon. No knives beyond what you needed to eat. No grenades. No ammunition. We scattered the bullets across the floor. 38 rounds that would stay here in the cellar. Evidence that we had been here, that we had survived, that we had chosen this. The climb up the stairs was harder than I remembered. My legs barely functioned. Knees would not bend properly. Each step required concentration, required willing your body to move in ways it no longer wanted to move. Gerhard went first, moved slowly but steadily. The rest of us followed. 5 men ascending from darkness toward light. The door opened with a groan. The cold air rushed in. The light hit us like a physical force. I had forgotten what daylight looked like, what the sky looked like, what anything looked like beyond the beam of a dying flashlight in absolute darkness. The world was white and grey and impossibly bright. I closed my eyes, opened them, closed them again. Your pupils needed time to adjust after 6 days of darkness. We stood at the cellar entrance and looked at the ruins. The factory complex stretched around us in frozen devastation. Broken walls and collapsed buildings, and metal twisted into shapes that metal should not take. Snow covered everything, made it all the same color, made it look almost peaceful in a barren, dead way. The temperature was the same as it had been 6 days ago, perhaps 35 degrees below freezing, perhaps 40. The wind cut through every layer of clothing like it was not there. I had thought I understood cold after 6 days in the cellar. I had been wrong. This was different. This was active. This was trying to kill you immediately rather than slowly. We helped each other move. Erich could not use his hands. The frostbitten fingers would not grip or hold. Brandt and I supported him on either side. Ernst and Gerhard moved together. 5 men shuffling through snow toward whatever came next. The ruins were eerily quiet. No sounds of battle, no sounds of engines or voices. Just wind and the creak of damaged structures and our own labored breathing. We moved south, toward where we thought the Soviet positions would be, toward surrender. My legs stopped working properly after 50 meters. Just stopped. The muscles would not respond to commands. I fell, got back up with help, fell again 20 meters later. Brandt was having similar problems. His coordination was gone, his balance was gone. We were moving on willpower alone, and willpower was not enough. We saw them before they saw us. Soviet patrol, 4 soldiers moving through the ruins, checking buildings, weapons ready but casual. The war was over for them. This was just cleanup, making sure the city was secure. Gerhard raised his hands. We all raised our hands, stood in the snow with our arms up. 5 frozen Germans who could barely stand, who looked more like corpses than soldiers, who were surrendering to men who might shoot us or might take us prisoner or might just leave us to freeze. One of the Russians saw us, shouted something to the others. All 4 turned, raised their weapons, approached carefully. Did not know if we were armed, did not know if this was a trap, did not trust anything in this city of death. They searched us roughly, hands moving over frozen clothing, looking for weapons, looking for anything dangerous. Found nothing because we had nothing, just broken bodies and destroyed equipment and the last remnants of will. They took our identification tags, checked our faces against the metal rectangles, confirmed we were who the tags said we were. One of them said something in Russian, might have been a question, might have been an observation. I did not understand the words, but understood the tone. You are prisoners now, you are ours. They took everything else, watches, photographs, letters, the small personal items men carry even when they should not. Everything went into a sack. One Russian took Gerhard's watch and held it up to the light, examined it, put it on his own wrist. The watch that had counted our days in the cellar now counted time for someone else. They did not bind our hands, did not need to. We could barely walk. We're not a threat to anyone. One Russian gestured with his rifle, pointed south. We started walking. The 4 soldiers formed a loose perimeter around us, kept their weapons ready, kept us moving. The walk was agony. Every step was negotiated with muscles that did not want to work, with joints that would not bend, with lungs that burned in the cold air. Erich fell twice, Ernst fell once. Each time the Russians waited while we got back up. Did not help, did not hurt, just waited. We joined other prisoners after 20 minutes of walking. Germans shuffling south in scattered groups, some in better condition than us, some in worse, all heading the same direction, all under Soviet guard, all part of the 91,000 who had survived the battle only to face whatever came next. The column grew as we moved, more prisoners joining from side streets and ruined buildings, more Germans who had held out past the official surrender. Some had been hiding like us, some had been in hospitals, some had been fighting in isolated pockets. Now we were all the same, all prisoners, all defeated. I saw Otto in the column, recognized him despite the filth and the exhaustion. He was being half-carried by 2 other prisoners. His leg had gotten worse, much worse. He saw me too. Nodded once, no words, just acknowledgement. We had both survived in our different ways, both made choices, both were here now. The Russians organized us into a more formal column. Hundreds of men, maybe thousands, difficult to count. Everyone looked the same. Gaunt faces, hollow eyes, bodies that moved mechanically without real awareness. We were not soldiers anymore. We're not really human anymore. We're something between living and dead. They marched us north. We walked for hours, or what felt like hours. Time lost meaning. There was only the next step, the next breath, the next meter of frozen ground. Men fell and were left behind. Men stopped moving and were shot or left to freeze. The column kept moving. I stopped thinking about anything beyond immediate survival. Stopped thinking about the cellar. Stopped thinking about the choice to surrender. Stopped thinking about anything except foot forward, breathe, foot forward, breathe. The rhythm of not dying for one more minute. The Soviet guards walked alongside us. Some were hostile, spat at us, hit us with rifle butts when we moved too slowly. Others were almost sympathetic. One offered Erich a cigarette. Erich could not hold it with his ruined hands, so the Russian held it to his lips, let him take a few pulls. Small mercy in the midst of brutality. We passed through what had been the German lines, through positions we had defended, through bunkers we had occupied. Everything was destroyed, everything was Soviet now. The city had changed hands, and we were proof of that change. By afternoon, the sun was starting to decline. We reached a collection point, a large area cleared of rubble. Thousands of prisoners already there, thousands more arriving, Soviet soldiers everywhere, processing, organizing, counting, turning chaos into order. They separated officers from enlisted, separated wounded from healthy, if you could call any of us healthy. separated us into groups of hundreds, assigned guards, assigned destinations, the machine of captivity processing its raw material. I lost track of Gerhardt in the crowd, lost track of everyone except Erich, who stayed close because he could not use his hands and needed help. Brandt disappeared into a different section. Ernst was taken with a group heading east. The 5 of us who had survived the cellar were scattered into the mass of prisoners. They gave us water. First water from a source other than melted snow in a week. I drank until my stomach hurt, until I wanted to vomit, until the Russian guard told me to stop. The water was cold, but it was clean, and it was sustaining, and it was the best thing I had tasted in months. They gave us bread, small pieces, hard black bread that you had to gnaw, but it was real food, not horse meat, not leather, not nothing. I ate slowly, made it last, knew this might be the last real meal for a long time. Night came. We sat in the collection area, thousands of Germans huddled together for warmth, guards watching from the perimeter, fires burning in barrels. The fires were for the guards, not for us. We sat in the cold and waited for whatever came next. I thought about the cellar, about the 6 days we had spent there, about the choice we had made to hide rather than surrender, about whether it had been worth it, about whether any of it mattered. We had survived 6 days longer than if we had surrendered immediately. 6 days of cold and fear and slow death. 6 days of freedom in the most technical sense. 6 days of being soldiers instead of prisoners. Had it mattered? Would we have been better off surrendering on the 31st with everyone else? Would those 6 days make any difference to what came next? I did not know. Would never know. The calculus of suffering did not work that way. Could not be reduced to simple equations of better or worse. Erich sat next to me in the darkness. His hands were wrapped in rags now. Some medic had looked at them, shaken his head, said something in Russian. The fingers would have to come off. Probably soon. Probably without anesthesia. That was what hiding had cost him. The night was as cold as any night in the cellar. But we were not alone now. We're surrounded by thousands. We're part of something larger than ourselves. The collective fate of the 6th Army. 91,000 men who had fought at Stalingrad and lost. Morning would bring the march north, toward the camps, toward Siberia, toward the fates that statistics predicted. Half would die on the march. Half of those who survived the march would die in the first year. Maybe 5,000 or 6,000 of us would ever see Germany again. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, we sat in the frozen collection area. We had survived the cellar, had survived the surrender, were alive in whatever limited sense that word had meaning. The stars came out, clear sky, no clouds, beautiful and merciless. The same stars that had looked down on us in the cellar, the same stars that looked down on everyone who had fought and died in this city, the same stars that would look down on whatever came next. I closed my eyes, leaned against Erich, felt the cold and the exhaustion and the knowledge that everything had changed and nothing had changed. We were prisoners now. We were alive now. Tomorrow we would be prisoners marching north. Tomorrow we might be alive or might not. But for now, in this moment, we had survived. That would have to be enough. The others who never left. February-March 1943. We heard about the others during the march north. Information traveled between prisoners in whispers. Stories passed from man to man during brief rest stops. Fragments of knowledge shared in the holding areas before we were divided and sent to different camps. The stories were about soldiers like us, soldiers who had hidden, soldiers who had made the same choice we made, soldiers who never came out. A prisoner from the Barricadi factory told me about a cellar the Russians found in early March. The cleanup teams had been working through a collapsed section of the production hall. Dogs detected something under the rubble. Soldiers cleared debris for hours, found a metal door 5 meters down, forced it open. Inside were 37 bodies, all German, all frozen, some sitting against walls, some lying on the floor, some pressed together for warmth that never arrived. They had been there for weeks, maybe since the surrender, maybe longer, had survived on nothing and then had stopped surviving. The bodies were perfectly preserved by the cold, looked almost alive, but they were not alive. Had not been alive for a long time. The cleanup team photographed them, documented the scene, then cleared the cellar and moved on to the next ruin. Another man told me about a group that fought. 7 soldiers in a basement near the tractor factory. Mid-February, the Russians called for surrender, promised safe passage to collection points. The Germans answered with rifle fire, killed 1 Soviet soldier, wounded 2 more. After that, there was no more calling for surrender, just grenades. The Russians threw them into the basement until the shooting stopped, then sent men down with flamethrowers to make certain. Nothing survived. The man telling me this had been part of the work detail that cleared the basement afterward. Said there was nothing left that looked human, just carbonized shapes and spent brass and the smell. Suicides happened constantly, not just among those hiding, but among prisoners too, men who could not face what came next, who understood the statistics, who knew what the camps meant. They found ways. Some still had hidden weapons, some used rope or belts, some simply walked away from the column until the guards shot them. Each method was a choice. Each choice was final. One prisoner described finding a cellar in late February. Small room under a collapsed building, single German soldier inside. Had shot himself, pistol frozen in his hand, letter next to him, explaining why. Asking forgiveness from family, asking to be remembered. The prisoner tried to save the letter. His guard took it, threw it away, said German letters did not matter now. The worst stories were about the ones nobody found, the deep cellars, the collapsed spaces, the hiding places that were too thoroughly buried. Soldiers who went in and never came out and were never discovered, who died in darkness without witness, who became part of the ruins permanently. A work detail in March found a cellar that had collapsed during the fighting. The entrance was completely blocked, no way in or out. When they finally cleared enough rubble to see inside, they found 17 bodies, all German, all arranged in a circle like they had been sitting together when the end came. No identification survived, no way to tell who they were, just remains that had once been soldiers. They collected the bodies, buried them in a mass grave. No names, no records, just numbers in a report somewhere. 17 Germans found in collapsed cellar. Added to the count of the dead, nothing more. I thought about Kraus and Zimmermann, about Ludwig who went with them, about whether they were out there somewhere in a cellar nobody had found yet, or frozen in a ruin that would not be cleared for years, or already buried in an unmarked grave with no one knowing their names. We had hidden for 6 days. They had tried to escape. Both were choices made under impossible conditions. Both involved gambling with death. We had surrendered and they had not, and that was the only difference between us. That decision made on the 7th day. The recognition that hiding had limits, that survival required capture. The cleanup operations continued through February and into March. The systematic search of every ruin, every cellar, every space large enough to hide a man. The Russians were thorough, used dogs and soldiers and flamethrowers and grenades, made sure the city was truly secured, made sure no pockets of resistance remained. Most of what they found was already dead, bodies frozen in hiding places, bodies that had died of exposure or starvation or wounds, bodies that would never be identified, never be counted individually, just added to the massive total of Stalingrad casualties. Some were found alive, starving and frozen and barely conscious, but alive. These were taken to collection points, added to the prisoner columns, sent north to the same camps we were going to. Whether being found alive was better than being found dead was a question nobody could answer. The numbers were impossible to know exactly. How many had hidden? How many had died hiding? How many were never found? The Russians kept records, but those records were not shared with prisoners, were classified, were kept in archives in Moscow or somewhere else beyond reach. Estimates ranged from hundreds to thousands. Soldiers scattered through the ruins, making individual choices about surrender versus hiding, about capture versus death, about whether to fight or freeze or walk out with hands raised. Each choice led somewhere. Most led to death. Some led to the camps. None led anywhere good. In the collection area that first night, I had wondered if our 6 days of hiding had mattered. If we had gained anything by refusing surrender. If we would have been better off giving up immediately with the rest of the 6th Army. Now marching north in a column of prisoners, I still did not know. We had survived 6 days longer than if we had surrendered. 6 days of freedom in the most technical sense. 6 days of being soldiers rather than prisoners. 6 days of cold and fear, and Wolfgang and Karl dying and our bodies breaking down. But we had survived those 6 days, had come out the other side. We're alive now when we could have been frozen corpses in a cellar. We're marching when we could have been buried under rubble. We're prisoners when we could have been statistics in a report about cleanup operations. The others who never left, they had made different calculations, had stayed hidden longer, had fought when we surrendered, had died in their cellars when we walked out of ours. Their choices were no more wrong than ours, just different, just based on different assessments of the same impossible situation. Eric walked beside me in the column. His hands were wrapped in cloth now, black fingers hidden. He would lose them eventually, would carry that mark of our 6 days forever, the physical price of hiding, the permanent reminder of the choice we made. He asked me if I thought the others had suffered more than us. The ones who died in the cellars, the ones who were found weeks later frozen together. I said I did not know, said suffering was not something you could measure against other suffering, said dead was dead, and alive was alive, and everything else was just speculation. But privately I thought they probably had suffered more. Probably had lasted longer in the cold, probably had watched each other die over days or weeks, probably had understood toward the end that no one was coming, that no rescue would arrive, that they would die in the darkness of their cellars. We had stopped before it got that far, had recognized the moment when hiding became dying, had walked out while we still could. That recognition had saved us. Whether what we were saved for was better than what we were saved from remained to be seen. The march continued north, the column of 91,000 broken men moving toward the camps, toward the fate that statistics predicted, toward the long, slow death that might last years instead of days. Whether that was better than freezing in a Stalingrad cellar was another question nobody could answer. But we were alive now, walking now, prisoners now. The others were dead or undiscovered or forgotten. We were here. That was the only certainty, the only fact that mattered in this moment. We had survived the cellar, had survived the surrender, were surviving the march. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own choices, its own prices to pay. For now we walked, 1 foot forward, then the next. The rhythm of not dying, the rhythm of prisoners, the rhythm that would define whatever time we had left. Soviet perspective. February 1943. Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov had been searching cellars for 8 days. His orders were simple: find any remaining German soldiers, secure the industrial district, make sure no pockets of resistance remained. The orders came from NKVD command, but his men were regular Red Army, infantry who had fought through the battle and now had to clean up after the surrender. They were tired and cold and wanted to go home. But the city was not yet secure. The factory ruins were endless. Hundreds of buildings, thousands of rooms, cellars under cellars, tunnels connecting spaces that should not be connected. The Germans had fought here for months, had turned every meter into a fortress, had died by the thousands in these halls. Now the survivors were hiding in the deep places, waiting for rescue that would never come, waiting for something that nobody could name. Volkov's unit used dogs, German shepherds trained to detect human scent. The dogs worked methodically, sniffing rubble, scratching at suspicious locations, barking when they found something. Sometimes they found bodies, sometimes they found soldiers, sometimes they found nothing but the smell of death that permeated everything. On the morning of the 4th of February, the dogs found something in the Red October plant, barked frantically at a pile of rubble near the northwest corner, scratched at a metal door half buried under collapsed masonry. Volkov's men cleared the debris, forced the door open, found stairs leading down. The sergeant went first, rifle ready, flashlight cutting through the darkness, called back that there was a body, German, dead for days, frozen solid. The rest of the squad descended, searched the space, found only the one corpse, no weapons, no supplies, just a dead Obergefreiter who had probably been wounded and died alone in the cold. But the dogs kept barking, kept indicating there was more, something deeper, something the men had not found yet. Volkov ordered a thorough search. His soldiers spread through the cellar, checked every corner, every shadow, found nothing. The dogs were insistent. There was something here, something human, something alive, perhaps. Volkov considered using grenades, considered using fire, but orders were to capture when possible. Dead Germans could not be interrogated, could not provide intelligence, could not be counted accurately for the reports that headquarters demanded. He called down into the darkness, in German, told them to come out, promised they would not be shot, promised safe passage to collection points. His German was poor but adequate, learned during the fighting, phrases for surrender, phrases for interrogation, phrases for the business of war. No response. He tried again, louder this time. Same message, same promises, still no response. The Germans were either not there or not interested in surrendering. Volkov checked his watch, calculated how much time to spend on this cellar before moving to the next location, decided on 10 more minutes, then grenades, then move on. His sergeant suggested a different approach, suggested waiting, suggested that whoever was down there would eventually have to come out, for water, for air, for whatever reason. Suggested posting guards and continuing the search elsewhere. Volkov considered this, decided it made sense, left 2 men to watch the entrance, took the rest of his squad deeper into the factory complex. They found 3 more cellars that day, one empty, one with 2 German bodies, one with a German soldier who surrendered immediately, hands up, no weapons, barely able to stand, more skeleton than man, starved and frozen and beyond caring what happened next. They took him to the collection point, added him to the thousands already there. Another prisoner, another mouth to feed, another body to march north. By evening, Volkov's unit had cleared 15 cellars, found 8 bodies, found 3 live prisoners, found evidence of many more who had been there and left or died or disappeared into the ruins. The work was slow. The work was cold. The work would continue for weeks. Private Ivan Sokolov hated the Germans. His village had burned. His family was gone. His sister had been found in a ditch with a bullet in her head. He had fought at Moscow and Stalingrad and seen things that made him understand hate in ways he had not known were possible. When they found Germans hiding in cellars, he wanted to shoot them, wanted to make them pay, wanted justice or revenge or whatever you called it when you killed the men who had destroyed everything you loved. But the orders were clear: capture when possible, only kill if they resisted. The NKVD wanted prisoners, wanted intelligence, wanted documentation. So Sokolov captured Germans and marched them to collection points and watched them shuffle north toward the camps and hoped they suffered there. Sometimes he broke the rules. Small violations. A rifle butt to the ribs when officers were not watching. A kick when they fell, spitting on them, taking their photographs and letters and throwing them away. Small revenges that meant nothing in the larger scale, but meant everything to him. Other soldiers were different, softer. One man in Sokolov's squad had given bread to a German prisoner, had offered cigarettes, had helped a wounded German walk when he could have left him to freeze. Sokolov did not understand this, did not understand how you could show mercy to men who had shown none. But the soldier had explained it simply, said the war was over, said these Germans were no longer soldiers, were just broken men who had lost, said revenge accomplished nothing, said mercy cost little. Sokolov had not been convinced, but had not argued. Each man made his own choices about such things. On the 7th of February, Sokolov's unit found 5 Germans walking through the ruins. Hands raised, no weapons, surrendering voluntarily. They looked like corpses that had learned to walk. Grey skin, hollow eyes, bodies that moved mechanically. One had hands wrapped in rags, another could barely stand. All were beyond the point where human beings were supposed to function. Sokolov searched them roughly, found nothing dangerous, nothing useful, just broken bodies and destroyed equipment and the smell of death that clung to everything. He took their identification tags, took their watches and photographs, sorted through their pockets, found letters home, found pictures of families, found the small items that soldiers carried, threw most of it away, kept the watches. The war had made him practical about such things. They marched the 5 Germans to the collection point, added them to the thousands already there. The Germans did not resist, did not complain, just walked where directed and sat where told and waited for whatever came next. Sokolov looked at them and felt his hatred war with something else, something that might have been pity but was too complicated to name. Captain Alexei Petrov of the NKVD was responsible for interrogation and documentation. He worked in a commandeered building that had once been a school, set up tables and chairs and processing stations, organized the chaos of surrender into something systematic, sorted prisoners by rank, identified officers for special interrogation, documented everything. The party wanted records, wanted proof, wanted numbers and names and confirmation that the victory was complete. The hidden ones were a problem. Not because they were dangerous, most were half dead by the time they were found, but because they complicated the documentation. The official surrender had been on the 2nd of February, but Germans kept appearing for weeks after. Found in cellars, found in tunnels, found hiding in ruins. Each one had to be processed, each one had to be explained in reports. Each one raised questions about how many more might still be out there. Petrov interviewed a German Obergefreiter who had hidden for 6 days, asked him why, asked him what he had hoped to accomplish. The German explained about the choice between hiding and camps, about the calculation of risks, about wanting a few more days of freedom. Petrov understood this logically, but did not understand it emotionally, did not understand choosing to freeze in a cellar over accepting the inevitable. But he documented the interview, added it to his reports, sent the German to the collection point with the others, moved on to the next prisoner, the next interview, the next documentation. The work was endless, but someone had to do it. Someone had to create the record of what had happened here. By mid-February, the cleanup was mostly complete. The systematic search had covered most of the city. The dogs and soldiers and NKVD teams had found most of what could be found. There were probably more Germans still hiding, probably more cellars that had not been discovered. But the active operations were winding down. The city was secure enough. The victory was complete enough. The war continued elsewhere. Volkov's unit was reassigned, sent west toward the new front. Sokolov went with them, carried his hatred and his small revenges and his stolen watches. Petrov stayed in Stalingrad, continued processing the last prisoners, continued documenting, continued creating the official record. The Germans who had hidden were footnotes in that record, small entries in larger reports, numbers added to other numbers. Their individual stories did not matter to the official history. What mattered was that they had been found, had been captured or killed, had been removed from the equation. The city was Soviet now. The battle was won. The cleanup was complete. The cellars remained. The ruins remained. The cold remained. The memory of what had happened here would remain for generations. But the fighting was done. The Germans were gone, or captured or dead. The victory was confirmed. Stalingrad belonged to the Soviet Union now.